So looking at part 16 of Wild Harvest Edibles, Thou Preparest a Table Before Me, which is a reminder of God's promise in Psalm 23. And as we move forward, just remember that things that are edible also function as medicine. Hippocrates said, "Let food be your medicine, and your medicine be your food." So as you navigate any health challenge, make sure that you have someone teamed up with you who has a similar philosophy of care as you do, and that the things that we share here are for educational purposes, and that you need to do your own due diligence. Shouldn't be construed as medical advice, but are things that others have found helpful in the past. So as we look at tonight's subject, we're looking at mullein, which is a common, very prominent weed that grows across North America. It prefers disturbed soils. You can see on the upper right picture that it has a nice broad leaf that is pre-flower spike. The flowering heads spike up typically in its second season, and that'll throw that up nice and tall, have lots of flowers. I was out in my garden this morning and noticing the mullein, actually it was last evening. In our garden, we have one flower spike, and the things that are edible are the leaves and the flowers. So typically they're edible, they're preferred in a tea form, but they can be eaten just straight or cooked. The leaves are actually very fuzzy, so they're actually preferentially used as nature's toilet paper, but they also have some edibility components to them as well. But I was thinking about collecting the flowers. If you could create some kind of a paper or fabric catchment device to put over the top of this flower spike so that when the flowers fall off, they would fall into this catchment device. It would be very handy for collecting the flowers rather than going and individually plucking them off periodically, because they are quite small, and the usage of them, the quantities can be fairly significant. So typically the leaves and the flowers are used as a tea, but they can be eaten in their whole form as well. It actually has more medicinal characteristics, but it's nice to know that things are edible too in a pinch. The medicinal characteristics that we're going to look at have a number of qualities to it. So we have anti-inflammatory qualities. So anti-inflammatories are things that are helpful in mitigating inflammation. And inflammation is the underlying basis of all disease processes. Also antiseptic, antispasmodic, so that'd be used in like muscles or that like coughing spasms or other muscular spasms. Demulcent, or as an astringent, it's a diuretic, an emollient. So an emollient is like a smoothing agent for like skin. An expectorant helps the mucus to come out. A painkiller, so an anodyne, or a wound healing vulnerary. The respiratory system can be benefited by using mullein. So it's helpful in bronchitis and tuberculosis and asthma. Helps to reduce mucus formation. So in that regard, it may even have some beneficial qualities in something like cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a very profound mucus producing situation. Basically, there's a breakdown in chloride channel capacities that breaks up the mucus. So it could be helpful in that, in aiding the phlegm, coughing out of the phlegm. I've never thought about that until just this very moment. So that's something to kind of think about. It's also an indicated treatment for tracheitis, basically just an inflammation of the trachea, and bronchitis, which is further down into the bronchi and the bronchioles that extend out into the lungs. So most effective for that is a tincture of mullein, lungwort lichen, and yerba santa. So the picture of yerba santa is there in the center, and lungwort, the lungwort lichen, can have multiple different types of colors associated with it. This is more of a green color. But if you look at the shape and the texture of the lungwort lichen, it is kind of a little bit like the alveoli in the sacs of the lung. So that's kind of where it got its name. So a tincture, again, as a tincture is derived from either a an alcohol base or a vegetable glycerin base, and it takes a period of extraction to get. So this would be a combination of those types of tinctures. Also, it can be helpful in emphysema. So an infusion as a tea of mullein with colt's foot. So colt's foot is an example here on the right, the yellow daisy-like flower there. It's not a daisy, but it's in the Asteraceae family. It eases breathing and also has expectorant qualities, as in being able to aid the body in ridding it of mucus. Helps to relieve coughing and wheezing. It's good over time. So using it for a long-term situation repeatedly over a period of time can be helpful, for particularly for emphysema, because emphysema often is related to smoking. It's a loss of lung elasticity. So one of the byproducts is overinflation of the lungs, and also there's mucus formation, and you have ciliary breakdown as far as its ability to remove the mucus from the lungs, and coughing becomes difficult because you have a loss of elasticity. But the emphysema or the mullein use can help to overcome that. There are other sources of emphysema as well. There are occupational sources, dust and other types of things that someone might have been challenged with over a long period of time during an occupational, depending on what the occupation might be. Again, asthma can be helpful, so it can bronchodilate, and inhaling the mullein smoke, the leaf smoke, can aid airway opening. So it'd be more like a kind of like an incense kind of a smoke. So that can be beneficial in that regard. A poultice of mullein leaves can be helpful on wounds, ulcers, tumors, and hemorrhoids. Basically, just take the leaves and mash them directly over the affected skin and cover it with a clean dressing. You can also use a oil that's been infused with mullein on the skin. So an infused oil would be like an olive oil that was poured over the blossoms, for example, and we'll look at a recipe here just below. The poultice has a drawing character. So if you take the mashed up leaves and put it on things like splinters or other embedded things like gravel, if you had an accident, it helps to draw those things out of the skin. It's also good for snake bites or other insect bites, and it can be used in place of plantain if plantain is not available. So it's kind of a backup. That's kind of a good thing to know. So infusing oil with mullein. You can take 2 cups of almond oil, sweet almond oil or olive oil, and a cup and a half of mullein flowers, fresh or dried. That's actually quite a few flowers. You probably will want to have collected them over a period of time. I've collected a few and have probably a couple tablespoons. So you infuse them for 3 to 4 weeks. And after infusing them, then you would filter out the flower bits and retain the oil for use as a skin salve or ointment on the skin. So I'd be infusing the mullein. So for the ears, for earaches, you can use that infused mullein oil that we just discussed there. The flowers are strongly bactericidal. So if there's a bacterial basis for the earache, it would help to mitigate that. An antibiotic is given to fight off bacteria. An antiviral is given to fight off viruses. An antifungal is given to fight off funguses. If you're given an antibiotic for a virus, it's not going to do any good. If you're given an antibiotic for a fungus, it's not going to do any good. No good at all, because usually antibiotics are indiscriminate and they will disrupt your microbiome, and your gut flora will be disrupted. So it's best to stay away from antibiotics. Plant-based antibiotics, things that go after bacteria and things, are typically just food that you eat, like garlic, for example. It has allicin in it and some other compounds that are very beneficial in reducing bacterial loads. So typically whole food plant sources that are antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal are going to not disrupt your microbiome in the way that a pharmaceutical grade antibiotic would do. So when you use those eardrops, you can use a cotton plug to retain them in the ear. suggestion is to treat both ears, even if just one ear is affected, just to keep it bilateral. If you have a punctured eardrum, don't put anything in the ear at all, because that's going to go past the eardrum and into the interaudial space beyond the eardrum, and that's not where anything should go other than the air that's there. So for sunburn and other skin inflammation, you can again use that infused oil directly on the skin. It's also antibacterial again and can prevent infection while helping the healing process. So that'd be helpful for someone who got a severe sunburn. Remember Dad being out on the beach one summer and having sunburn that was epic, just peeled off in sheets. This probably would have been a good thing to know at that time, not only because of the pain, but just the peeling, and help to aid the healing of the skin from that burn. Warts, you can use the powdered mullein root. Rub the powdered mullein on warts, and it kills the virus. It removes the wart, so it has some antiviral qualities to it as well. And you can just use it multiple times. Just put that powder on throughout the day, at different times throughout the day, until the wart resolves itself and heals. Warts are kind of an interesting thing. They kind of come and go. I remember having warts as a kid occasionally, and then they would be gone. Haven't had warts in years, and that could be because of dietary choices that I've made since that time. Can't remember the last time I had a wart, but I do remember having them as a kid. Mullein juice can also be helpful for warts. The picture on the right is St. John's wort, which can be used in conjunction with mullein to help soothe sunburn. So cramps and muscle spasms, remember it's an antispasmodic. So you can use the mullein tea for cramps and spasm. So that is drinking it, as well as you can use the infused oil that we talked about earlier on the areas that may be spasming. For the gastrointestinal tract, you can use the mullein root tea. So it's excellent for eliminating intestinal worms and other gastrointestinal issues. So it's always nice to know of things that can expel worms from the body. There's a few things out there that'll do that. The mullein leaves, typically you harvest them from the plant that's producing the flower stalk, and as opposed to one that hasn't had a flower stalk yet. The flowers are best fresh, but they can be dried and used during the off season when they're not flowering. An infusion or tea of the mullein root, take a half teaspoon of the powdered mullein root, and then to 1 cup of boiling water, and you're going to boil it, bring it to a boil, and then reduce it and simmer it 10 minutes. Then drink it. So you're going to be treating it, even though it's a tea, you're going to be treating it a little bit more like a decoction. So decoction is heated for a longer period of time than a typical infusion. Typical infusion is pouring boiling water over it, letting it steep, whereas this is maintaining a simmering temperature for a longer period of time. So warning with mullein, don't use it if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. And some people have sensitivities, and that can be true for anything that we talk about. And if you have a sensitivity to something, just discontinue use immediately. If you are experiencing any kind of symptoms that are abnormal, because people do have various sensitivities to different things. And if you do have a sensitivity to something, you should stay away from it. We're going to look at another plant here that's pretty fun, the oxeye daisy. The oxeye daisy, Leucanthemum vulgare. So vulgare is kind of wild. It's a white mum, or it's actually it's a daisy, an Asteraceae family. The flowers are edible, the young shoots and the leaves, as well as the roots. It has a pretty strong flavor. I enjoy just clipping off the leaves. You can see fresh leaves there in the upper right corner. You can nibble on those. You can use the flowers in various salads to add a nice accent to it. I don't have flowers mentioned here, but they are edible too. The age of the plant increases the depth of the flavor, or the strongness of the flavor. If you're going to be using it at an older age, just switch the water out, boil it, and switch the water out to fresh water, and that'll help reduce some of the bite to daisy. So you can add it to soups and stews to add nutrition and flavor dimensions. So the whole plant is useful, but the flower is the most powerful part of the oxeye daisy from a medicinal standpoint. As the anti-inflammatory, antispasmodic, diuretic, and tonic effects. So tonic is anything that's going to tend the body towards health. It can induce sweating, which can be a therapeutic modality, be a cough relief, as well as aiding wound healing. So for the oxeye daisy tea, just boil the flowers, leaves, and stems all together. So just pick a stem off and with a flower with the leaves attached, and reduce the heat after bring it to a boil and steep it for 5 to 10 minutes, and then strain and drink it. So take kind of the edge off the flavor. You can add honey if you'd like to. So chest congestion and coughing. Whooping cough and colds can benefit from using the oxeye daisy tea, and then also, again, like mullein, it can aid congestion and lung mucus buildup to help to reduce that. And then using the oxeye flower tea or a tincture is the best way to approach that from the oxeye daisy. So a tincture, again, is a longer term extraction process, either alcohol or vegetable glycerin versus the tea. So in asthma, it functions as an antispasmodic. So basically, when you're having asthma, you're having spasms of the bronchioles down deep in the lung tissue and making it difficult to get a breath. And it can aid breathing for asthmatics. As a tonic, it can tend toward health. It soothes irritations and body inflammation. So it's a systemic anti-inflammatory. From a skin perspective, the tea, as well as various salves and lotions, can help to reduce inflammation and skin irritations like bug bites and things like that, stings, cuts, and scrapes, and also fungal infections. You can use the tea or the decoction of the oxeye daisy. For the eyes, you can use it particularly in conjunctivitis. Conjunctivitis, the conjuncta is the little fleshy part down at the very nasal end of the eye. Sometimes that can be inflamed or irritated. Itis is inflammation of the conjuncta. Just boil the flowers in distilled water. It's typically the treatment or the protocol for using things in the eye is using distilled water, so no impurities in it. Strain it through a very fine mesh or a coffee filter, so you have all the particles out of it, and then cool it and use it sterile as an eye wash for eye infections. It also functions as a detoxification and diuretic component. So creates mild sweating, promotes sweating, and as a mild diuretic. So again, sweating is a cleanser and can help to remove toxins. So the diuresis or the urine production is going to be a way of removing toxins from the body, as well as sweating. So the skin is actually your largest excretory organ. And by sweating and keeping the skin clean, you can aid the removal of toxins from the body. Interestingly enough, it can also function as a flea control and insecticide. So take the dried flower heads. You can see a little patch of those up in the upper right corner. You can dry them just by cutting them off and tying them in bundles and hanging them up and dry them. But powder the blossoms into a very fine powder, and you can use it as an insecticide. So just sprinkle it around where fleas are or other insects that you want to have gone, and it will remove them. So harvest the leaves, the flower, and the stems while the plant is in flower. So this is the nice flower, daisy flower field here. So that would be the time when you'd want to harvest them. And then you can dry them for use during the wintertime.